Hello, welcome to today's show. Today we're going to do a hypersonic 300 AAC low development for thin-skinned game, aka deer and piggies. So come on back. Well, before we get started, let's dispense with the disclaimers. There is no warranty, either written or implied. This is only intended to entertain, not to instruct. It is not for educational purposes and is, well, it's not worth anything more than what you paid for it, I suppose. So what do you say we get started? Now, the 300 AAC has recently attracted a lot of attention the last couple of years. And one of the things that we'll have to do in order to develop a load is to come up with some brass. Now there's different ways you could do it. You could buy your brass or you can make it. I think the vast majority of people are probably recycling brass from the 5.56 or the 223. Now, I personally purchased 1,000 rounds of used range brass from the United States, from some United States military base somewhere, through somebody who had taken bid on, literally it's sold by the ton, by the bin, and then they have to go through separate. Most of it, I think, it was Lake City brass. Some of it was some Israeli brass, but it's whatever it is. It's potluck. It's cat's arse and kitty britches. You get what you get, and it's done by basically by the pound. That's how they weigh it out, and the weights are approximate. Counts are approximate rather, and that's that. I also have some rounds from, some shot rounds from other ways which lets you recycle the brass. One of the things that is a negative then is the fact that mil-spec brass has the primers staked in, so after you punch it out, you deprime it, you have to come out and ream it or swage it or something like that. Now, why don't we go through making a piece from salvaged brass. I have a number of pieces that we've already shot and made, and I have my developed load brass over here as I step through it, but it seems to be of interest for people to see, going through it. It's not that big a deal. I think there are probably videos on this. In fact, I know there are videos on this online. So let's get to it. Okay, well, first we'll need some brass, and whether it's deprimed or not really is of no real importance at this point, because what we'll need to do is we'll have to have a little baby cut-off saw, and these were sold by a retailer in America, but they were discontinued. I think it's because of the propensity to probably, there's very few safety devices. There's no real guard. If I take this off, there's no idiot-proof guard there, and one could chop one's finger off. So they were discontinued. Last I looked, they were still available on through China, different colored plastic, but look just like them. And this is a ramp developed for the AAC for making brass that you can find online if you just look for them. It works pretty good. I think this is the second generation. So this stuff should still be available. I've had it for a while. But we just take a piece of brass. I tell you what, let's take a couple of 3 pieces out so we can see it sort of work. And I don't know how loud this will be, but what we do is I've already got this set right here, such that with this little set screw it sets the depth, and I've taken the base off. It has like a little clamp chop saw base, and we've taken that off and mounted the little ramp. And I think you probably fashioned something if you couldn't find this, but I think these probably are still available. And what we do is we feed it from this end, and it saws off at the correct length, or very close to the correct length. We'll have to come back and trim it later, but the closest, as close as you get to the proper length means just the less trimming you have to do. And since I've already done this a number of times, it's pretty close. So let's turn it on and go. I don't know if this is coming through, but we just feed it in. And it cut it to the approximate length. Now, what we'll do after this is move our little pieces out. And I will set this aside. I will take my 4 ends away, throw them in the bin, and let's see, where is my, there it is, there's my C-clamp. And I'll set up a handy dandy little case trimmer. And this you should recognize if you've done any online work. And it's also already set up. Now we have to form our brass. Take a little case oil. So zoom back out for us, shall we? All right. Now we're going to lube our little pad. Put our lube away. Take our what we call this rough brass. Run it through. Come over to our press to where our forming die is, our full-size forming die. And now we have formed one piece. Let's go ahead and run through the other couple pieces. Now, we've made 3 pieces of rough brass. Put it in the trimmer. And there's videos by the manufacturer that will show you how to properly set this up to the length. And we have a set of calipers we'll use here in just a moment to verify the case length. And you just sit here. Since I've already done the adjustment for you, and one of the things that will help for uniformity is if you turn the crank with a uniform pressure each time, you'll come out with a variation of case length within a few thousandths. And what it is you're looking for is that you don't have it over the maximum length. And I think you can see, well, that it really doesn't take that much. To make this work. Let me take this off, my C-clamp down, set my trim bushing to the side. Now, we would have, over here, we would have deprimed the mill brass. We've got to do a couple things. This is a little tool for reaming the pockets because they are staked on. I'll put up a photograph of, so this happens to be a piece of Lake City. This happens to be, looks like a piece of Privy. Feels like a virgin piece right there. Partisan Privy, I believe it is, or Privy Partisan, I forget. And what we have to do is we have to take, doesn't take that much turning, and it has a little depth stop right there. That's made by Hornady. And of course you got to deburr this. And like I say, I know the length is right. We'll verify this in just a moment, and I'll put the value up. And I usually trim it just a couple of 2 or 3 thousandths under the maximum so it can grow after a few shavings, a few formings. And that came out to 1367. So that's under the limit. So now we have this ready. Our next step would be to prime it. Now here, all we're doing here is we're just priming the prepped case. There it is. Set that off to the side. Make sure we have a proper seated primer, and it feels about right. Set those off to the side. There are different ways that we can do the powder measure. Using H110, it is a very uniform powder in terms of the particle size. And I actually use this powder throw right here. It's another reason why it's generally not my goal to run, if I'm going to use the powder throw, why I'm not going to try to run it maximum all the time. I might try to push it a little bit towards maximum if there's a valid reason to do so with the 308 AC hypersonics and the bullet construction for conventional 308 style bullets. They do need either 1800 feet per second according to Nosler for the ballistic tip, 125 ballistic tip, or 2000 feet per second for the Hornady SST as the general product lines for both Hornady SST and Nosler ballistic tips state that they are. They're not going to just suddenly stop working when you cross over at $17.99 or at $19.99. They're going to continue to have some degree. They're just going to have a reduced reliability, I think, at those speeds. So there may be a little bit of a benefit of running a little toward the line if my firearm can handle it without showing any signs. And that's, quite honestly, this other part that we did here with our stepped up load development, using a starting load and incrementing them up in groups of 3, so we're not just doing one shell at one point. We're actually running 3, because if we have a little difference in the depth of our primers, I want to have more than just one single bullet fired to make that observation, so I can kind of see them, because there may be maybe I have, since I'm using reclaimed brass, maybe one of my primer pockets is a little more loose and lets the primer come back. But what I'm looking for, in some cases, overly flattened primers, and I'm looking for some leakage around the primer to see if I'm getting a little bit of gas come back. I'm looking for ruptured primers, which I know I'm not going to have. stepping up slowly. I'm going to watch those as I go. Now, the load that I had worked off of published data from the manufacturers. I'm going to load up my powder throw, and what we'll do is we'll just go back and forth. I'll throw, measure, throw, measure, throw, measure, and once I see that I'm getting a uniform throw off of it, I will know that I can go ahead and use it. And what you do is you simply powder it, seat the bullet, powder it, seat the bullet, powder it, seat the bullet, and there we have. And of course, I've already got the die set over here, which is just a matter of setting the bullet depth, using again the calipers to make sure it matches our desired amount. So let's take a little bit of a break, check the cameras, check our memory, make sure we still have plenty of, check the audio, and go from here. Okay, let's get started again. Now, I happen to have the exact amount cut off of the screen by the edge of the camera, but we can see that what we got started here with is a 0.0 being the appropriate balance point that we're looking for. We've got no load on the balance beam. Now I'm going to come over here, set the amount appropriate. As long as I don't move my overhead, I'll put a blur on it as to protect the innocent and extraordinarily good looking. And we'll go through this process of balancing out. Now, I have it set for the charge amount. Here's my little powder throw. What I want to do is turn my little handle, see how it lays. Now it's a tiny bit light. Let me see if it repeats since I just put powder in there. Just turn it down, bring it back. Again, it's a tiny bit light. So on this particular unit, we'll do it one more time. Okay, we're still light. So what we're going to do is I have actually three things that we can adjust. We have a little black, very gross amount of powder adjustment. Then I have two thumb screws. Since I'm very close, I have the center one does a big brass piece and the small one does just a very, very fine amount. And I'm going to turn the small one out. Try it again. It's a little bit shy still. I'm going to loosen my set, turn it out about a quarter. Throw a little powder. Let's try that. What would you believe? It's perfect. I'm going to turn that back in just this fine adjustment, just a little bit. Tighten that down. I'm going to run with that. And we want to stay, it's best advisable to stay under the maximum. Now why would I do this way? Because if I were doing match grade bullets, I would measure every single one. But this is for deer. So I just need a certain degree of reasonable accuracy. And I want to make sure that I'm reasonably safe, that I'm not overcharging. I also don't want to take all night to do much. Now I'm only going to do 4 in this example. And where we are in this stage of the game are primered, prepped, and now we need 4 bullets. And of course, to keep this a minimum amount of time, come back here, bullet, I need to have my overall length, which I have not mentioned. I take a piece of brass. I run it underneath my charge. Charge it. Place it in the press. Take a bullet. Have it. Now we've got one more step, and I actually come over here to this second press to do this, but I can't very well do this without resetting the camera. I will do that in just a second. And what I do when I've run this is I make one at a time after I verify that I have not seated the bullet in the wrong location. Now, we have made 4 assembled bullets. Where are my calipers? Let me check. And yes, the depth is fine. So let's reposition the camera for the final set. All right, now this last step is putting an additional crimp on the cartridge, and the dies are set. So all this has been done. I'm trying to save some time so we don't have another marathon video, but the purpose of putting a little crimp on this is a little collet crimp. Very similar to a roll crimp. It's just a little side pressure crimp on it. It's to put a uniform pressure, more so than just the sized brass crimp is. What it's for is when it auto load, after it sequences, puts the next one in the chamber, we want to make sure that it does not force the bullet in a different depth, because the difference in that lead, the actual lead is the difference between this chamber end and the spec and then where the rifling start. The closer to this rifling the bullet is, the more accurate it will become. But if you don't let the bullet start out and run, it can make some high pressures. That's one thing, kind of gives some, and the difference in that depth will cause a difference in pressure. The difference in pressure will cause a difference in accuracy of where the bullet goes. Unless you do a chamber measure for your specific rifle and know where the lands start, you have to go with the general purpose, safe, backed off distance that we have. And this is going to give only a certain amount of accuracy. So that's where. So this little bit is just a matter of putting a little uniform pressure, collet crimping the bullet into the case, so actually the case around the bullet, to make sure there's enough pressure so that when it chambers in the ramps into the chamber, that it doesn't change the position of the bullet in the case, creating some, a little deeper than others, a little longer than others, some a little deeper into the brass, because that would add yet another variable in it. Also, I wouldn't want to add any more crimp than is necessary just to keep the bullet from moving, because the higher pressure on there, again, that kind of raises the case pressure. But we are using reclaimed, recycled military brass, and it's based on price, reputation, construction design, availability, and manufacturer's reputation. I select 1 or 2 bullets. Likewise, I select a powder. But before I can do that, I need load data. and I get my load data from respected, trustworthy professional sources. These often include the bullet manufacturers themselves or their load manuals. Granted, that may seem painfully obvious, but these two bullets I initially chose are very different. Likewise, these differences are reflected in charges for the given powders. I selected the 125 Nosler ballistic tip and the 125 Hornady super shock tip, or SST. Both are very good and both are very different. The way I see it, the Nosler is designed for good penetration. Because of that, one feature of construction is a copper jacket which is thinner up front to allow for expansion and a thick, heavy wall after. The Hornady SST, comparatively, is a lighter jacketed bullet which may also taper thicker at the base, but in my experience is more like a varmint bullet given rapid expansion and massive internal effect. Therefore, despite having the same grain weight, I'm not surprised to find different starting and maximum charges for a given powder. As a refresher, I bought this as what I call a box build. What I mean by that is a complete, or nearly so, upper and lower, which is then assembled to a sighted firearm requiring no special tools. The upper was a finished 20% off, end of season, just before annual inventory, obsolete model, and it really did not have an ideal twist rate for a 125 hypersonic load, but I figured it was good enough for a 50-yard brush gun. When I shot it, the accuracy was, well, not all I had hoped. So I worked up the SST loads and compared. The SSTs patterned much better. I diagnosed the likely cause as old primers. I changed the charge in primers, and the Nosler ballistic tip group tightened up comparable to the Hornady SST. Success was enjoyed and a good time was had by all. It was finally field ready. Still, I thought I could do better. So I floated the barrel after season closed. I ran across a bullet made by Sierra and was led to understand it was purpose-built for the 300 AAC. Now that seems a little odd as it was labeled as a varmint bullet, a 135 grain varmint bullet, but a varmint nonetheless. I called Sierra and they confirmed while explaining they were more 300 Win Mags, 30-06, 308s, etc. than 300 AAC rifles out there, and at their velocities it would be a varminter. So I worked up a load with a different powder known for a different burn rate, slightly more energetic and slightly less accurate perhaps. If you'll notice, to the left and to the right are the previously worked up loads on the post-float barrel. Okay, how about a quick recap? If I have a weapon that I'm unfamiliar with, a fresh build or something like that, I always think it's a good idea if I get a similar factory load to what I'm trying to develop. I fire that box and get an idea to make sure that the firearm is operating, cycling, whatever it's doing properly. It also gives me a benchmark on the brass. I can get an idea for what the brass looks like and make sure it's extracting properly. A load, when I develop one, I like to find a load based upon commonly available bullets and powder. I don't like to get anything too exotic. It might be too hard to come by. So by doing that, I can call the bullet manufacturers, the powder manufacturer, and see what is available. They often will provide free of charge for a specific bullet and powder the maximum and minimum loads for that. That gives me my starting charge and my never exceed load. I may not be able to get to the maximum load depending on the specific barrel tightness, conditions, running, operating. A lot of factors will go into it. But I find that developing this into 5 steps, 5 ladders, 5 walk-ups, however you want to call it, works well for me. In 3-shot group or 5-shot group is even better. Develop, starting at the start, stepping up, fire them, inspect each piece of brass. Best way to do that is when I'm out, I spread a piece of blue tarpaulin down. I catch each individual brass. Fire it, check it. Gives me a little bit of rest time in between shots doing it that way, and I get an idea for the repeatability by the 3 or 5 shot group. 25 bullets is better than 15. 50, repeating the entire process a second time, is even better. Here's a picture showing 3 calibers. 223 Remington, 6.8 SPC, and the 300 AAC, left to right. You might wonder, why is the overall length of the 300 AAC so short? Well, the 300 Whisper and 300 AAC were designed to use everything on a standard AR but the barrel. The two ribs in an AR mag are positioned so that the cartridges can't slide around. The 300s use a 308 diameter bullet. There are a lot of things that impact the accuracy of a rifle. This 300 AAC was a box build at minimum cost, so I'd hate for people to think I'm this terrible a shot. So here's a sample of a 100-yard group which was shot from a ground-up 6.8 SPC build. Thank you, and we appreciate you watching the show. Have a great day.